Shinji and Warhammer40k, Chapter 28, The Creeping Rot, Part 1.
Return for a few moments to the memory of Adam's revival. That glowing giant with bright rings spreading miles high into the sky. A teenage girl watched at and was struck mute, her face and her mind fading into the unceasing sounds of the sea. The waves rushed and receded, timeless, and 15 years later the sound was the same. It was restful and utterly uncaring of all mankind's frantic concerns. Shinji Ikari lay upon the beach, his head pointed towards the sea. His eyes were closed, and in the deep of night it felt as if tomorrow did not need to come. There was a cottage nearby, and in it someone was likewise eating up the time, in his case watching TV. He was a very large bruiser of a man, whose every facet denoted hired thug, or dumb guard. He sat on a wooden crate, and the television was a small 14-inch portable. The buzz on the international news networks was about how Russia once more opened its interior, offering no explanations as to why they'd suddenly shut down all contact a month ago and pulled several armies into the Eastern Territory. China also closed its borders and responded. It seemed for some time there that war was about to break out. As sudden as it started, it was over, leaving most political analysts puzzled and making wild guesses. He snorted and changed the channel. A movie trailer began to play. There is a voice, soft, young, feminine, and dire. It wafts through as if buoyed by the breeze. "Can you be happy like this?" she asks. There is a young man who seems not to hear. He stabs a pitchfork into a heap of hay and begins to shift it into a larger pile. He looks up at the sunlit sky and wipes sweat off his forehead. A hawk circles overhead. He turns back to his task. He is not tall or well-muscled, his skin only starting to bronze from open-air work. His lanky frame hides a certain mullish persistence and a frantic denial of anything more complicated than farming. Some space to farm, some seeds to plant. Is this all you really want out of your life? His hair is long, bound by a single blue bandana. His eyes show intelligence and intense concentration, ill-suited to the mundane repetition of his labours. Is this contentment? Sweat glistens off his exposed arms. Behind him the fields are empty. The grain has been harvested, the fruits taken from the trees. Or is this cowardice? The hawk screeches. He ignores it. You ask for little, but the land demands more of you. The ground shakes and he has to jab the pitchfork in to steady himself. A scratching sound fills the air, and cracks spread through the field, clumps of earth breaking loose and rising. He was being lifted up high, hay, sod, rocks and all. His eyes widen, in fear. You will hide from me no longer. You will shine, or you will die. He turns around, very reluctantly. There, looming over him is a monstrous face, with glowing yellow eyes and a single horn rising from its armoured forehead. It opens its maw to show great gnashing teeth. Its indrawn breath draws a gust of wind that tugs at the loose flaps of his clothing. The young man screams. It roars. Darkness. The sound of war drums rising in volume. This summer! The shadow passes, and the clanking of war wheels follows it. Wagons, painted in bright and chaotic patterns, festooned with spikes, roll on by. Upon them stand green, hulking creatures, whose mirth show great sharp teeth. There is the sound of many feet marching in step, and as the view widens, what seemed to be a field of grass is revealed to be the pulsating mass of a truly massive green-skinned army. A shout, guttural and million strong. A sudden clang and darkness again. The deep voice returns, along with white block letters receding. A world-changing event! It is a throne room, and amidst the courtiers and advisers is a very reluctant king. He has a grizzled chin and his crown fits poorly. He looks sleepy, and is prodded back to wakefulness by an annoyed captain of the Imperial Guards. He grins weakly at her, and she merely turns away with a sniff. "Sire, please, we must take action," speaks the minister, himself still rather young. Those who have seen the first movie would recognise him as the bronze cleric, but it turns out he was happier being a paper pusher than as a preacher. "The orcs are massing in numbers unheard of since 3 years ago." There is the jingling of little bells at the end of a staff. "Burning, looting, stripping the land," mumbles the magician, the long-haired iron cleric of before. He was having very little luck in managing court magician functions, sufficing ceremony and plenty of hand-waving for any actual results at seeing the future. "Her army is few, her magic is exhausted, but that is not the worst of it." Fortunately, he had retained his amazing common-sense powers. "Gargant walks, Gargant drives them forward. The orcs are in a frenzy for a reason." The king looks up, his expression hollow. "The same reason as 3 years ago?" The magician grins faintly and lets his staff jingle ahead again. "The time comes again when gods walk among mere mortals. Who can say who lives past that day?" The scene fades away. Boom! The explosion breaks apart a plaster wall and splatters orc insides all on the outsides of an old mansion. A girl's voice, irate, rushes through the din of battle. "There are greenskins here too! Unacceptable! Kill them all!" A line of musketmen fired a volley, then charged with bayonets. Their uniforms were in red, decorated with yellow robes, evoking golden filigree. "You heard the princess!" shouted the sergeant of that squad. "Cleanse these filth!" Bomblets fell from the sky, sending everyone scrambling for cover. The view changes to the inside control center of a large war zeppelin. While the front is functional enough, the back is made to look like some ornate salon. "More bombs! More bombs!" says a girl with flowing red hair, her back to the camera. She has on a well-fitting suit of plate armor. Her air general approaches from the side. "Forgiveness, princess, but our men are still in skirmish with the Greenscales. We won't be cutting off their line of retreat." "Or kill them indiscriminately," he did not add, for that sounded too much like criticism. "Am I not the Sun Maiden? Do I not possess the might of the Red Tower? Are they not supposed to fight in my honour?" She sniffs contemptuously and tosses her hair back. "They'll just have to fight harder and break the enemy's line faster, that's all." "It will be done, as you say, princess." The explosions intensify. "We'll break old myths." Trumpets blare out and drums slam, and the pale light of sunset reveals a scene as if out of hell. Dismembered bodies strewn all over, blood, paint, ruined walls. One broken facade has a strange 8-pointed symbol. A fist slams into its centre and breaks apart the brickwork. The view zooms out to reveal the scary lady and a few orcs of her entourage. She bends down to pick up what seems to be a massive machine cannon. It is larger than her, but she holds it effortlessly. She frowns and tosses it aside. One of her orc guards takes the gun. There is a scratching sound and fingers poke out from hastily dug graves. She turns around, her face grim. The orcs surrounded her protectively, wielding their large axes. A ghostly moan fills the wind and the battle begins. Shatter new certainties. A girl puts on a skull-marked cap and steps into an upright casket. The lid slams shut and recedes into a shaft lined with rusty, hissing pipes. And a strange mechanical warrior throws itself into battle against a horde of giant monsters with gleaming black skin, serrated claws and vile, oozing spits. It spins its torso round and round, extending its arms like flails and scattering everything around it. A female voice proclaims, "Be purged in cleansing flame!" Fire shoots out of vents all over its body. "Unleash the hero within us all!" The court magician yells out, jumping into the fray, a chain sword singing in his right hand. He is followed by prisoners, and even the very guards they used to detain them. The cramped corridors of a zeppelin is already marked by the devastation left in his wake. Elsewhere, the soldiers of the Third City once again fight on against impossible odds. And destroy the power of fear. The roar of Principio Eternus is unmistakable, and it rears up to show what it held in its monstrous hand. The young man stands unflinching, the wind snatching at his long hair, tied back by a white bandana. He crosses his arms together and smirks slightly. Clang! Letters, as if made of iron, red hot from the forge, are stamped onto the screen. Evangelion Fantasy Battle 2, The Call of Chaos, coming August 2016. Shinji heard the sound of metal-shorn boots upon sand. He tilted his head back to see large silhouetted figures approach. They gathered around him, and stark against the moon, he could see nothing of their faces. It's time, a coarse voice said. They're on the move. You can't put this off for any more. The boy sighed. I suppose it was useless to pretend I could hide from it forever. He began to get back to his feet. He looked across the beach, towards the pier, where cargo was still being loaded onto a moored ship. Even through the distance, its shape was unmistakable. 9 large cannons proclaimed it was a warship. You're gonna need this, the voice added. An object dropped onto the beach in front of him. It gave off a faint sheen. Shinji picked it up. For a time he looked at it, pensive, examining the way light glinted off its polished surface. Then, with slow deliberation, put it on. The golden laurels fit securely on his head. The tall figure blocking the light stepped aside, and the moon showed a face with eyes hollow with worry. He sighed. Useless after all. July 6th, 2016. Nerve was at full alert. It was the real thing. Another angel had arrived. Do we have authorization to engage yet? Misato asked aloud. Yes, we do. The Far East Alliance have decided to hold off on their initial nuclear attack, Shigeru answered. Then, perhaps more helpfully, the Trident Line Dreadnought is standing by in case of surface attack. Misato sniffed. I suppose they want to save that for where they'd be useful. Each other. She sat at her command station and slapped her hands down on the armrests. All right, time to get useful, everybody. But latterly it had occurred to Nerve, why was it that the central tower of the command centre only had enough seats for the bridge bunnies and the actual commander? The sub-commander, the operations director, and the chief scientist, when she had some exposition to offer, all had to stand around whenever there was an attack. Even UN and JSSDF guests got their own places. The very first thing Misato ordered as the empowered operations director was to get the technicians to haul up some chairs. It only took around 15 minutes to weld in new chairs and tables. It didn't help the habit of people calling the Mazu Central Tower a bridge. It would have been worse if she was still a captain. Misato swiveled around to face her science officer, Ritsuko. Is this the same angel that attacked last week? The main screen showed the angel codenamed Irurel. It looked like an upright right cylinder, bulging out at the bottom, where there was a single large eye. Spikes ran along the rim, slightly longer at the bottom edge. Ritsuko pulled up an image of the earlier high-speed attack form, which was an onion-like shape, with the same long pointed protrusions. Most likely. Seeing how it adapted this time to deal with our defences should be fascinating. More like annoying. Status check on the Avers? Titan modules read okay. Switching to umbilical cable power. Maya's console showed 40000 operations window. That was at minimal activity. Estimated charge time with heavy AT field application was at 30 minutes. Plenty of time, all things considering. Misato clapped her hands. Evangelions! Launch! The electromagnetic rails shrieked, and in far above, 2 gargantuan shapes burst out of an open pit. Tokyo 3 was completely dark, lights out to conserve power and not to give the angels something to aim at. The pale moonlight showed the Evangelions only as jagged silhouettes. The Type T equipment used on Unit 2 encased the entire neck and upper torso, and put heavy pods over the shoulders. The Titan modules were further refined from the bulky prototype, so as not to hinder the Ava's mobility. Leaving the shoulders free also meant that the Avers may rest in their cages ready with the modules, saving precious time and effort. Asuka's high mobility frame had the battery pack around the neck and closing over the head, looking like a pharaoh's headdress. This was for easy replacement of power packs. Ray's beam sniper frame had a much larger but fixed reserve. This gave Unit 0 a slightly hunched over look, with arms grossly oversized by the heat sinks wrapped around them. These were the optimized systems as learned from the prototypes since first displayed against the terror attack on Tokyo 3. Rapid deployment had become the watchword of Nerve. These were Titan modules Das Ritter and Cannon Boss. "Where is it?" Asuka asked. Which among all the lights in the sky was the enemy? "It's holding geostationary orbit 28 kilometers above. Prepare to receive targeting data." Misato swiveled her chair back to the screen. "You know the drill. Take position at firing point Gamma. Ray, fire on my mark. Asuka, guide the beam." "Okay." "Roger." The Evangelion walked over to a spot behind a nearby hill. There was a power station nearby, and Unit 0 connected the umbilical plug into its back socket. Unit 2 did the same, but the socket was on its front T-type armor plate. "Now!" The Moonbiter dual positron cannon shot out twin beams, which passed between the outstretched arms of Unit 2. Its AT field wrapped around the beams, even going so far as to spin the shots into a helix. The attack slammed into Irurail's AT field, and there was a blinding flash. "Shield up!" Misato shouted. Quickly, a slab of ceramic-infused armor plate rose from the hilltop. The returning beam carved through the plate, but the fraction of a second in delay was more than enough time for both Avers to raise their fields to maximum. The distinctive hexagonal shape lit up the night. The air crackled with exotic particles. So great was the energy released that the hillside began to fuse into glass, and the main screen showed only static. A few moments passed by, and the sensors went back online. "Asuka! Ray! Are you alright?" "I'm fine. Shall we try again?" "I am uninjured." "No damage to the Avers. Primary power station reserves down 15. 3 hours and 39 total operations time remaining," Mai reported. She sent the data over to the Magi. "AT field efficiency calculations is at 22 minutes. Damn, these things are getting smart. Bring up the Hellball. Even if we can't guide it with the AT field, maybe we can get lucky." "Which can evolve faster, our technology or their biology?" Ritsuko put in with a grim smile. "We don't have the same output as a bomb pump laser, but the flow is constant, reflecting the beam back, attack and defense in one. I must say I'm impressed. I wonder if we can bounce the beams back and forth." "This isn't ping pong, you know." "The Angel's retreating!" Makoto shouted out. "Our radar's starting to degrade!" Iriel's skin was even starting to darken. It slid back into the remote expanse of outer space. Reactionless motion was another thing that had the scientists in stitches. Misato snarled and slapped her hands down hard at her chair's armrests. "Maybe too smart. They've probed our defenses enough for tonight." "Day!" Asuka said through the link. "Why aren't the Angels attacking with more than one? Stupid cowards! Come down so I can kill you!" The Red Aver shook its fist at the sky. "Ha! I taunt in your general direction!" Nerve's operations director tugged at her own hair slightly. One of the necessities of command was always keeping one's composure. "So be it then." "It's not going to be back for a while, if it's the same sort of..." And it pained her to say, intelligence-gathering attack like those other times. "You girls can come down now," she sighed. "I hereby release Nerve from level 1 combat conditions to standard alert status." She got up from her chair and went over the command tower's edge. She looked at her watch, and now that she was no longer supreme authority, yawned impressively. "What? It's already 2:30 in the morning? I don't think the Angel will attack again. I'm bringing the kids home, if it's all right with you, sir." Kozo Futsuki was emerging from a small one-man elevator. He nodded and went over to the commander's chair. Very reluctantly, he sat on it. "I hereby receive Nerve in standard alert. Thank you, Major Katsuragi. You may go." Misato nodded and went away. She rubbed at her eyes. She'd always distrusted authority figures, and now she was one. She couldn't even pretend she could put it down, like the difference between on duty and off duty as a soldier. Oh God, it was politics. Yes, damn that Gendo. Damn him for getting her promoted. What a cunning and evil plan to increase her salary and make her a truly responsible adult. What a bastard. It wasn't worth driving a precious, innocent boy away. Time skipped on by. It had been 3 months since Shinji Ikari quit Nerve and disappeared without a trace. There was the largest unofficial manhunt, boy hunt, ever attempted, with no results. This may have had more to do with the intelligence agencies all competing aggressively for any trace of his whereabouts than any special action on his part. Things had settled into a new equilibrium. Asuka walked towards school, yawning. With Shinji gone, she had to prepare her own meals. Masato was capable of cooking edibly, but was often just too cheap or too lazy to bother. Her best friend, Ikari, decided to just add one more lunchbox to her daily preparations, so the pilot had no worry there. It was only at breakfast and dinner. Asuka was getting sick of takeout meals. The biggest change in her life was that Rei now lived in the Katsuragi apartment. With Shinji's resignation from Nerve, the UN decided to get a better look at how the other pilots were being treated. Rei was picked up from a building and dumped at Masato's door well before the Overwatch Committee had even cleared the airport. Asuka was getting sick of tofu too. The chores were assigned on a rotating basis, as playing rock, paper, scissors with Rei gave up only hordes of ties. Fears that instead of being abused, the pilots would only end up spoiled rotten by all that publicity only proved false. Tokyo 3 and its citizens respected them, but respected their personal space. Even at class, they were treated with casual deference. That day, however, Asuka's reluctance to even move at all was not because it was her turn at early morning chores, but more on a lack of sleep. "Is it true?" she blearily asked Rei. "Are they getting smarter?" "Dr. Akagi is convinced the angels practice active evolution." "Well, are they?" Rei did not shrug. "As Pilot Akari said, I am human with some special features. I am not qualified to judge." "Well, I agree with Ritsuko. Evolution tends to go from stupid but durable or smart and breakable. I don't care why the angels are attacking us, but it looks like we're going to have to prove our right to exist. The thing is, they're acting smarter, but still not smart enough." She stomped her feet. "It's just too simple. Why not attack with more than one?" What with Asuka hanging around the laboratory so much, she might as well have been the new apprentice. Maya was a journeywoman, what with her going off to In-His base on occasion to fine-tune the simulation data and alternately learning or teaching new programming techniques. When the scientist realised that, she grabbed her old friend and got roaring drunk. "It all goes round and round," she gibbered out. "What's that word? Evolution! Everything keeps repeating. Even the changes are the same." "I cannot be sure, but I would guess that the angels, for some reason, do not really get along?" Asuka smirked. "Good answer." She took a deep breath. "We're like ants. Tiny, squishy. We can strip an elephant down to the bone." She abruptly lost her smile. "Refusing a direct confrontation. At least it's alive, but it's not accomplishing much." "It does return stronger after each time." But here's what we've been discussing back at the lab. How do we know it's really the same one?" Rei paused her walking. Only the very faintest trace of puzzlement showed on her face, but Asuka had grown adept enough at recognizing that. As much as people found her eerie, so did the normal mindset confuse Ayanami. Anything that falls under trickery simply didn't occur to her. It would take a bit more to develop a Morkian mind. "I see your point, Pilot Soyu, and it frightens me." Asuka sniffed and took a casual stance, her hands behind her head. Just because it looks the same doesn't mean it is the same." She turned around twice, keeping a carefully blank look on her face. "It's the sort of thing we're trying to find proof of one way or another. There's more than one kind of angel. We know that at least. Can they reproduce?" "I do not know." The reproductive rate was often inversely proportional to the lifespan of a creature. What then, when a being's lifespan was just something short of infinite? "Reproduction is like mass production of a species anyway. We've been attacked how many times in just 3 months?" 16. "The 3 months before that?" 2. Sacriel's attack was worth all the others before. So where do the angels go when they're not making our life uncomfortable? Ray shuddered. It was like something in her was whispering, I could tell you. Ask me. My price is trifling, really. All that knowledge, all that power. Do not resist. She shook her head. I cannot help there. Bitch, I will be free. You are mine, and no amount of foolish hope can change that. They resumed walking. Asuka yawned again. Damn it! Well, we're being worked to the bone here without getting anything done. He's probably having the time of his life somewhere. I highly doubt that, Soryu. The two girls briefly had the image of Shinji Ikari in a party. He was the sort of boy who would rather be off to one side reading a book than the centre of conversation. It could be a Turkish affair, with belly dances and everything, and he tried to read about the defeat of Darius at the hands of Alexander. That he would willingly seek out excitement in his life? Nah. What a boring sort of boy, Asuka said after a while. Knowing that doesn't make me feel any better at all. That sort of boy tends to turn into a patrician someday. Again, with the not giving of the good feelings. Ray tilted her head to the side. An interesting way to arrange words, Pilot Soryu. You intrigue me. Getting worse? At that point, Asuka no longer quite disliked Ray. As an unfeeling doll, perfectly passive and preferred by all. That was because in her own way, she was being aggressive, which only creeped out Asuka immensely. Someone with such a bland lifestyle shouldn't have episodes of unpredictability. She made an exaggerated gasp of surprise. Look! School! Where we wouldn't have to force ourselves into awkward conversation! She rushed in. Ray pouted very slightly, and followed. But not that I'm saying anything against how Nerve is doing. At that, Kensuke gave a slightly frightened but mostly apologetic look at the pilots. But isn't it not enough to just drive it off? I thought angels are supposed to be killed. He made a helpless bow towards the pilots again. No offence meant, please. Are you saying we're incapable of killing angels? That we can't manage without that baka Shinji to hold our hand? Asuka asked archly. No, please. That's not well, you may be right, Asuka sniffed. The problem is that the angels, attacking from orbital height, has a damn good AT field. We can't do what we did to kill the last one, because a bomb pump laser needs 2 Avers to feed and bottle the energy, and 1 more for control. The positron beam attack only requires 2. 1 for attack, another for guidance and defense from counterattack. 3 is indeed the optimal number for such extreme Evangelion measures. Excuses, Kensuke snorted. What? You got something better, pencil neck? We've been trying to kill that thing every time for 16 tries now. It just runs away before we can really focus our full force at it. The answer seems obvious. 1 shot. 100% deadly, 100% accurate. Hence, the big-ass cannon being built on the lake. Ah, yes. The one that, when complete, will take at least 3 days to charge up. It was Asuka's turn to snort derisively. It's not available, so it doesn't count. I said the answer seems obvious, Soryu. Kensuke grinned and wagged a finger. The less obvious answer doesn't rely on external tricks. Willpower, creative thinking, and a whole lot of guts, maybe. What is it? Make the Ava fly. Asuka laughed. You know how much those things weigh? What, you think if we try to jump high enough, our feet might forget about gravity? Did I say anything about the Ava propelling itself? Someone else can. Preferably, one other Ava can throw said Ava into place. Asuka blinked. You're crazy. That's so idiotic. That it just might work. Have you been in contact with Pilot Ikari? No. I blame the interwebs for this little piece of insanity. The conversation hushed up as the teacher arrived. He looked barely awake as he trudged into class. Then again, the same could be said of Yang Wen-li at all times. All right, class, settle down. Sorry I'm late, but we've got to start classes now. Stand! Bow! The class did so. Yes. Thank you, Miss Haraki. He'd always learned in his own sedate pace, and the formal practice of teaching still bothered him. He forgot to prepare his lessons in advance, arrived late, left early, was distressingly casual about rules. In short, he was hardly the model teacher. Hell, He'd fire himself if he could. Now, I know that there was some excitement again last night, but that's not important right now. Did anyone actually even bother to do their homework this time? Hikari raised her hand. Reluctantly, Toji did so too, since she'd been there to make sure he did something halfway sensible. Mana considered it something of an order from a superior officer. The Evangelion pilots managed to do something before being called to alert. Apparently, no one else did. Certainly not Kensuke, who had a, well, I wasn't home, so technically I shouldn't have to do homework, right? Expression. Yang sighed. Fine. I'll just quiz you later. The questionnaire which he had conveniently foisted off on someone else. That abraded the boredom a bit, not even knowing what the hell the students were answering. He could take the test at the same time. Even more exciting, sometimes the questions themselves would be wrong. One of the boys raised his hand. Yes, Yamada? Yang allowed. Sensei, how can you say it's not important? I mean, an angel attacked. The angels caught second impact. All this time we were lied to. We could have all died. The boy was new to Tokyo 3, and everyone there gave him a sympathetic look for his confused dismay. That is true. However, much of your education before this was to teach you about the world before impact, to give you a reference point for how it feels to have all that ripped away. Yang leaned back on his chair as if the memories weighed him down. Yes, now the truth can be told. There was an angel in Antarctica, and there was a big explosion. But it's been 15 years, lad, and our population's still at a decline. Most people died in the panic and the general lawlessness a few hours after the event than in the event itself. The boy felt acutely embarrassed and sat down. It wasn't that anyone had laughed at him. That might have been better. Much more than the certain bleak acceptance the class had. That man's worst enemy has been, and will always be man. Yang yawned again. The lesson. Where were we? The repercussions to the Valentine's Day Treaty, Sensei, Hikari responded, and the attack on Tokyo after it was signed. Oh, that... Do I have to? He groaned out. Yes, you do, Hikari scolded. Yeah, well, I might have had something to do with that. It didn't take long for the class to get over the fact that, yes, he's that guy in the archives. Without Hikari to remind him, he wouldn't have any lessons at all. Yang was the sort of person who needed the woman's push into whatever brilliance he had to do. It was embarrassing to even watch, actually. That was the warlord's son. He sent off one of the bombs at a permanent lock-on to Tokyo. It was too slow, he sighed. He wanted to destroy whatever he could, just to be remembered if not as a hero then as a monster. Damn fool even idolized Hitler and Stalin. His voice took on an edge. The only reason he wasn't able to send off more was that he hit him with 3 of our own bombs. It was a stupid, pointless death. His soldiers were ready to desert, but there wasn't enough time. He stood up and walked over to the window. Tokyo was mostly empty by that time. Sustainable agriculture is the key to a nation's survival, not petty things like prestige. Even suburbs wouldn't be useful there, so everyone decided to move further inland. He put his hand on the windowsill. There was nothing there, hardly the capitalistic landscape he so wanted to mire in infamy. But there are other bombs, other places where people lived. So I burned him. It was all so stupid. It should never have gone that far. I had the largest army in the world. I controlled practically every strategic site. Why wouldn't he just give up? He wanted to shout. We were like brothers once. Why couldn't he just believe I'd show mercy? The school board dared not fire him. Admiral Yang liked proper education over formal education, and he'd kicked ass all over China to make sure that the books told of what really happened. Damn the propaganda! All the inconvenient truths, all the glories and all the mistakes. Let them feel pride and shame and, most of all, hope. Yang was a historian. Those who do not learn from history were doomed to repeat it. He loved history and wanted to spread that around. It would have been nice to have Shinji Ikari in his class. The boy had that look of a fellow history nut. However, in their first and only meeting, Yang Ren Li learned that the boy would perhaps learn it all the same way he did. Reality was still ever so much stranger than fiction. They both knew that. Not that they had anything against fiction, which was quite enjoyable too, mind you. That was their next thought. Both did not tempt the existence of narrative casualty, authored by Finnegal, edited by Murphy. Absolute governments, though the disgrace of human nature, have this advantage with them. They are simple. If the people suffer, they know the head from which their suffering springs, know likewise the remedy, and are not bewildered by a variety of causes and cures. To this saying by Thomas Paine did Gendo Ikari owe his freedom. Strangely enough, Gendo was naturally apolitical. He had no specific policy or ideology to advance, other than his simple self-interest. The comparison to a snake was apt. He could chuck off any factional garb that no longer served his purpose. The only exceptions were nerve, which bore the stamp of his personality, which was determined to its independence, despite what Seal would like to think, and recovery of you, inasmuch as the only goal he could be said to have. Gendo Ikari was at least thorough in covering up evidence. He'd been doing that for so long it was second nature, which was why the boy's actions really threw him. He had no way of denying it or covering it up. If he got rid of the boy or Katsuragi, then he would have to think of reasons why they were missing. Then manage Ryuji. Then whoever comes after him. Damn that boy. There was a brutal simplicity to it that ensured he'd have to do most of the work in ruining himself. Even calling in favours, or obliquely referring to whatever he held over the politicians who put him into power in the first place, could only reduce his position. What irritated him the most was that after that masterstroke, that culmination of months of shaping the public, the boy had simply left. The old king sat uneasy in his throne, knowing that the young king could have taken it so easily. It couldn't have been out of respect or mercy. It was a mystery. At this point, however, the most immediate annoyance was that his needlessly large office was no longer quite so remote and foreboding. 3 more tables were pushed in, and a cabalistic tree of life on the ceiling was openly derided as ridiculous. His own private sanctum was invaded by those he had thought of only as ignorant pawns. He was under no illusions that it was anything other than the most deliberate insult. Gendo Ikari remained in command of Nerve, despite the clamour for him to at least step down. He was privy to too many dark secrets for him to let go that easily. However, the UN severely undercut his authority. Nerve, strangely enough, functioned as a quasi-corporation. The Supreme Commander had to be accountable to the board, which was supposed to be the UN Security Council. His authority was not so much reduced, as that others were boosted considerably. The tables were arranged in a pentagon, with the open side devoted to a projection screen. It showed a grainy video sent over the military net. The grammatically uncertain and strategically dubious Earth's cradle was somewhere in the mountains of Kenya. Its construction was carried out with a surprising level of secrecy, the kind helped by layered military cordons and road trains escorted by tanks. All it showed to the world was a large dome, thick, matte black in colour, made of a strong amalgam of materials. A belt system was the only way in or out of the Earth's cradle, and once the elevators receded, it should be practically impregnable. The outer shell alone was capable of withstanding a direct hit from a nuclear bomb. The single service entrance could also be shut or collapsed to deny entry to angel-sized enemies, an option of limited utility in Nerve's geofront. Beyond that was a large inner space, designed mainly as a kill zone for anyone that manages to get through. It had its own factories, its own hydroponic farms, its own power plants. Shut off from the outside world, it could function at full capacity for at least 5 years. Had minimal functions, with most of its populace under cryogenic suspension, around 500. Top scientists and supposedly vital people were to be frozen into dreamless sleep, to be revived at a later date to rebuild the broken world. An ambitious project, humanity's last card to play against extinction. If they had another 15 years, even 10, since construction techniques had improved from lessons learned with Tokyo 3, it might have lived up to its promises. Construction began only 5 years prior. As it was, only the cryogenic capsules, the primary defences and the outer shell were in place. They didn't have Evangelions, but perhaps the next best thing. The screen showed a jerky, static smeared image of a clear blue sky. There was a strange, dark, bulbous shape at the distance. The view clicked into zoom modes, but it only gave up an even grainier image. They are as thick with EMP charge even from that far away. Is it trying to jam our radar? A voice thick with a garbled accent was heard. Akagi had said something about jamming merely being a side effect. Maybe this is its main method of perception. Do you believe that, Doctor? A hypothesis, no matter how pretty, is not proof. The other voice had a clipped, arrogant edge. Ritsuko's eyes widened at recognizing it. There could be no monopoly on genius, and to insist the Evangelion is the only defender on this earth is the height of hubris. We need to show that we have as much right and as much ability to fight for a desired future. Very admirable sentiment, but what can we actually do? We won't know until we try, of course. Amidst the beeping, shouted reports, and various sounds of an active command center, his voice rose out, oddly shrill. Prepare all 3 Rawborn units for launch. I find that inadvisable. I'm in charge here, General Stockman. I know what these machines are capable of. I know, most of all, that we need to use them. Show their power to the world. This is a UN operation, and if you deny my civilian authority, then you might as well be just another petty warlord. That's not... Fine. Those words were hissed out. Let's see what they can do. Launch! Martin Arthur Betzelheim, Jagged Wolf, launching! Sarah Campbell, Phoenix Spasm, launching! Kaworu Nagisa, Barrow Leos, launching. The camera showed a huge shape passing by. If the Ava was an artificial human, then it was an artificial animal, though clearly based upon the Evangelion. It walked on bird-like hind legs, and its forelimbs were comparatively small arms ending in claws and pincers. Its head was vaguely draconic. Its feet ended with talons. Above it hovered something much like it, held aloft by triple copter blades. Nearby was another mechanical beast, seemingly built around one massive gun. Take the shot, Nagisa. We'll get into range. As you wish, Bettelheim-kun. Firing. The screen broke out into static. Ho! Now there's a gun! A youthful male voice said with savage glee. Eat megatons per second, bitch! And you, other bitch, cover me while I see if I have to finish it off. Yes, sir, a soft girl's voice replied. And in the distance, the crumpled white shell of the angel Irurel. No way in hell! Misato shouted. Those are tridents, Ritsuko gasped in similar disbelief. She turned to Misato and explained. The original trident designs, T. Raiden T, based on Evangelion technology. The Trident Land Dreadnought is the complete antithesis to the Trident Land Cruiser. Limited in range, limited in sophistication. This is everything we rejected from the original design. How could they have shot down an angel? Misato responded hotly. Summarize, the report goes thus. The angel appeared. We blasted it. It fell down. Gendo replied with cool disdain. Misato Katsuragi was assigned the post of Nerve Director of Operations. She no longer had to wait for word from up high before releasing the Evangelions. As far as Tokyo 3 was concerned, she was it. From pilot training to combat operations, only her judgment mattered. From the earliest possible sign of an angel attack, she was there at the command center, staying up so that they wouldn't have to wake up the pilots until there was no other choice. She knew well enough that it might be worth trading the children's lives for the world, but that was not a situation Nerve could accept so easily. After everything we tried, we couldn't use the bomb pump homing laser since that needs 3 layered AT fields, but the positron beams chased that thing all over the sky just last week. Last night we gave it the power we saved up from 2 full days of charging. How did they even hit the angel, much less go through the AT field? As far as we know, the angel didn't even have time to raise its AT field, the sub-commander put in. Nerve America was also attacked by the angel, if less frequently, and even their single Evangelion was capable of driving it off. Then how can No, as far as I'm concerned, the only thing worthy of being called the Trident is over there at the Trident base. Can these things generate an AT field? Ritsuko smirked as she read through the data. Technically, you're correct. Inhis must have sold off their designs, but the Trident project designation remains theirs. The things are called war-borne heavy machine weapons. She put a cigarette to her mouth but didn't light it. Even if they are based on the Evangelion, no mere knockoff can equal the Eva. Much of the strength of the Trident Land Dreadnought comes from recognizing its specific advantages and disadvantages.
Dr. Akagi,
Gendo warned. No, they lack the means to build an artificial core. They can't generate an AT field.
Is it even a real angel? Kaji asked, in support.
That much, yes. They recovered an intact core.
The video showed the process of extracting that.
Strangely enough, the inside of the shell is mostly hollow, and the core was suspended at the centre of a web-like structure formed of various unspecified materials.
Masato leaned back and sucked in her lips.
So the angel shows up, holds still, doesn't even raise its AT field, and gets sucker punched? It's too convenient for them, isn't it? Simply speaking, the Earth's cradle seems like that much less of a threat, even if it does have most of the scientists and assets recovered from Nerve Germany,
Ritsuko replied.
Perhaps it was just curious, and paid the price for carelessness.
Without the capability to generate an AT field, these Trident derivatives remain in insufficient measure. However, they do now have an intact angel core, which might prove troublesome. Ritsuko twitched visibly.
Inasmuch as we are UN Nerve, the Earth's cradle is UN Nadir, as a last-ditch effort designed to ensure the survival of our species. We may be sure its scientific director will grab at every advantage he can, even if it must be denied to us. He genuinely believes the world is doomed to, even deserving of failure. Really? Who's that nihilistic asshole?
Asked Masato.
Wait, does that count if he thinks everybody else should die?
Ritsuko groaned, rubbing her temples.
A small man with a narrow mind, overflowing with delusions of greatness. Who? Sean Vord later.
Even Gendo blinked as a sudden silence descended into the room. Several moments passed.
Masato commented carefully. I can guess how that might mess up a guy.
It was so bad she couldn't even laugh about it.
Did his parents hate him or something? Because if he changed his name and his own, he really deserves whatever he gets. No, it's his real name. His parents were... Let's just say there are shocking liberals, and some are simply insane.
Ritsuko sighed.
Dr. Lader's brilliant, but his stubbornness is rather legendary in our circles. I will not excuse it as a reaction against his childhood, since he is an asshole, and out of the scientific community, no one likes him. If he wasn't the foremost expert in his own field.
What is his field? Gendo asked.
Cybernetics.
Hence the production model Tridents. He frowned slightly. Might they prove a threat to the Evangelion project?
They did shoot down an angel, Fuyutsuki noted.
Under highly suspicious circumstances, Kaji replied. He kept his eye on Gendo, all the while silently fuming that it was situations like such that made the bastard necessary. Nerve could ill afford any competition, but the UN had to make a decision that was as divisive as it was decisive. The battle against the Hackreal broke whatever illusions of security other nations had, and drove home the fact that it was a war without any hope of negotiation, a war headed towards extinction, every nation for itself. I can't help but think this is all going to turn out to be just an extremely expensive placebo.
We at least have identified which political blocs are most opposed to Nerve's current command structure, Fuyutsuki thought. Now the question is, what are we supposed to do about it? Few supported him being elevated to the post of Nerve commander. Fortunately, the resistance to any outsider being placed in command was even more vicious from the rest of the UN Assembly than all those who dared suggest it were made to look foolish. The impression of steady, fearless, if unpleasant leadership seemed more important than appeasing the public about the boy's departure. It kept the political jackals at bay, and frankly, there wasn't much that could be done without Shinji Ikari to act as a lever.
We must examine this data more thoroughly, said Gendo. If the core is intact, then the angel cannot be said to be dead just yet. Maintain readiness, Katsuragi.
Yes, sir!
Masato even managed to keep out the disdain from her voice. Course she would. Like she needed any more reminders of how serious her responsibilities were. With classes over, Kensuke headed over to Trident Base. He did phone his father that he might again stay the night at the machine pits. A part of him pondered if he should really be feeling more regret at how he was drifting apart from his family. Was it really something he should just let happen? He was a human, not a machine. As usual, however, he tabled that thought for later. The guard saluted as he passed, already a familiar figure around the site. He bowed slightly back, conscious that he was still somewhat outside of the military structure. Once inside, he put on a many-pocketed vest over his uniform, and a customary white lab coat over that. He went out to the hangar to bask for a while in the wonder of man's works. 3 months had passed, and that was plenty of time to overhaul in his operations. Although intended mainly for support, Trident couldn't afford to look useless even when it wasn't called to active duty. They'd moved the hangars over that time, to a more secure underground storage location. It was just a few levels down, but the machine pit provided some protection for the land dreadnought when shut down. The second bay also held the next Trident war machine under construction. He looked at the Trident II for a few more minutes. It was still semi-monocoque in construction, using entirely mechanical components, but was 20% larger and had an internal frame to better handle impact and shear stress. The centre held a gaping cavity where the fusion reactor should be. Unlike the Ava, which in its decidedly humanoid frames could only handle one type of large weapon at once, the land dreadnoughts were built around the idea of multiple hard-mounted weapon systems to handle threats at all ranges. In essence, really, walking naval-level firepower. It took all of Kensuke's might not to call the place the Trident Land Dockyards. He went down the elevators into the 3rd underground level, which contained the training area and the tactical control centre. Main JSSDF command was still in the bunker at Atsugi, but at least now Trident had its own means of keeping an eye on the battle, instead of relying upon Nerve's feed. In effect, another supplement to the capacities of Tokyo 3 Tactical Response, in case Nerve goes offline again. It turned out that he failed to win the Evangelion Fantasy Online Championship, as it happened a day just after Shinji left. Perhaps it was just as well. His consultancy at Inhis later gave him an unfair advantage, in that the simulated Angel opponents had to be fed into the battle simulator. Guess who had the job of balancing that out for the Trident's training? Mayabuki's code worked so well that modifications and additional modules could now be handled entirely from off-site. The Avas and the land dreadnoughts still occasionally fought against each other. It was possible, through good tactics, for Magnos Tancred to even beat the Ava, 2 or 3 times out of 10. Kensuke arrived at the training room to see Mana Kirishima pacing and unleashing a litany of castigation upon her crew. She was absent that day. The school gave some allowance for training schedules with the pilots, being understood that a few seconds gained out of practice was more useful than a high score in a literature exam. Even failing school, the students could just take classes again when it was all over. There was no second try for a vaporized Tokyo 3. The two, Jiro Takeda and Vince Nagato, were young soldiers fresh out of the academy. The red and black of Kirishima Corps' colours fit well, and for their part managed to look properly abashed. "What the fuck is wrong with you two?" she shouted, shaking her gloved fists. "Slow! You're too slow! Stop being so damn timid! We can beat the Avas at range, no matter how good the Titan modules are. Batteries can't equal an onboard reactor." "But you ordered us to close in," Corporal Takeda said doubtfully. "Of course I did, you moron!" Mana shouted at her driver. "The goddamn AT field's most effective at range. We only have 1 or 2 shots in surprise, and it better not miss. The field doesn't work well in close range. They got melee if the air's solid in the way." She lifted her artificial hand and clenched it in front of her face. "That's why we put fists in the brawler configuration." She then directed her attention to her gunner. "The Evangelion can hide itself in the AT field sense of the enemy. Guess what? We don't have any biological components. We don't show up under jamming at all. That's why it all works only at line of sight. That's why I want you to get a first strike kill every damn time. In close range, the Ava can't hide from us. We can hear their footsteps, idiot! Our sensors don't have to convert into synaptic input." Kensuke chuckled and got their notice. Don't you think you're being a little hard on them, Kirishima? The Ava's direct link may be complex, but it's also quick. There's only so much human reaction times can do if the limbs have to work the controls, and that gets translated into motion. There's a time delay, no matter how we look at it.
The girl snorted.
That's why we have to practice. We can't slack off, especially not now. The weak point of Tancred is that he still can't fight as one seamless unit. You might be holding him to an impossible idea, Kirishima,
Kensuke said while pushing up on his glasses.
You can't punish them for not being able to react to your subconscious cues, like others more familiar with you could have.
Mana squinted at him. She snapped back to her crew.
20 laps around the base! Now! Now!
Then back to Kensuke with a snarl.
You come with me, Ada.
Kensuke shrugged, following. While Mana kept up a fearsome persona on base, he knew from school that she took pride in her own self-control. She wasn't as fickle or quick with handing out punishments as a carry could be. She brought them to a nearby stockroom and locked the door. At that point, he started to feel a little nervous.
Ada, I know you've got a mouth on you, but you're the only one I can turn to with this problem.
She looked down, her eyes hidden under the brim of her cap, and the skull there seemed to grin at him.
If you say anything about this to anyone, I'll kill you!
Kensuke looked pained.
Oh, God, he whispered. Not feminine problems. Why me?
Why always me? I'm a machinist, damn it. I follow the machine spirit, so I don't have to listen to those icky aspects of biology or your sob stories.
Ada!
He made a zipping motion with his lips.
Okay. I'm the soul of confidentiality.
Mana sighed. She began to zip down the front of her coat.
Ever since Ikari-san touched me, all those months ago, I've been getting feelings.
She then started unbuttoning her shirt, all the way down, exposing her bra.
I need your help. I can't keep it to myself anymore.
Whoa! Kensuke's eyes bugged out, and he waved his arms round.
Not that I'm not flattered and all, but don't you think you should be saving it up for Ikari? He's not likely that he'll refuse you, Kirishima, if you just ask What am I saying?
Belatedly, his brain caught up to his words. His lips twitched up into a grin.
I'll be happy to help you solve your problem. Idiot!
Mana huffed out. She reached into her shirt and unhitched her mechanical arm. She then held out her left arm.
You gonna help or what?
Kensuke sighed and dropped his shoulders.
Yeah, as expected.
He might as well have been an asexual being to the few girls he knew that were not blabbering fangirls. Was it too much to ask for a girl with brains and personality? Unfortunately, with his obsessions, those that had those qualities either stayed away or thought him gay. Tugging at the hand, he pulled out the artificial arm through the sleeves. The skin-like texture was even somewhat warm.
Oh, this is the nerve issue, he said. I guess my combat custom arms are still somewhat unresponsive.
Mana merely looked troubled. Kensuke sighed again.
What am I supposed to do with this? Go over there with your back to me, would you? Make sure I can't see it.
She then turned around to facing the wall.
You got something sharp on you? Not too sharp to damage the skin.
Kensuke put the arm on a crate and rummaged around his many vest pockets.
Of course.
He took out a small chisel.
Now what? Poke at the fingers a little. I'm going to try and tell you which ones you're getting at.
Kensuke looked back. She was still facing the wall. Oh well. He jabbed at the fingers a few times, feeling somewhat silly.
Index, middle, ring, pinky, thumb, pinky, index, pinky again.
Kensuke turned around.
You're peeking. I'm not,
Mana replied, her shoulder heaving in indignation. She thumped the bill of her cap on the wall. Kensuke rubbed at his chin, wishing he had a little grizzle there to look debonair. Maybe even a beard, eventually, though he supposed that might be a fire hazard. He turned back to the arm and poked at the ring finger a little more forcefully.
Ow!
Said Mana. The finger in question might have even twitched a little.
Uncanny,
Kensuke breathed.
How long has this been going on? I told you, I've been getting feelings ever since Shinji-san touched me. Back in the onsen, before he left. Touched? Define touched,
he added with a leer.
Mana blushed hotly. He put his hand on my scar, that's all, she replied. Kensuke leaned back and looked thoughtful. That was 3 months ago. You've had this going on for that long and didn't tell anyone? There are no nerve connections here. Well, it's not like it sounds plausible even when it's right there. Besides, for a while I thought it was like fat and pain. Just my imagination supplying the feelings. It only became real to me a month or so ago. It's been increasing ever since. The glasses geek turned around. Let me try something. You're tracing a finger on my palm. Line from the base of my middle finger to the tip. Mana's eyes widened. Her blush deepened. Stop licking me, you pervert! A full range of sensations. Does it only work with this arm? Maybe it's the little dregs of Evangelion technology used in the artificial muscles. Mana shook her head. No, it seems to work on whatever arm I have on at the time. It's only with that it's clearest what's happening. Maybe because it's the most lifelike? Kensuke peeked closer at the arm. Logically, there's no reason for it to work. Do you feel any pain when your wrist breaks open for the gun arm? No? You don't sound all that surprised. The boy raved aside. Oh, I'm not like Siryu. I don't necessarily need to believe in a rational universe. That sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? Mana walked over to him, shaking her head. I thought you had this, the universe is a great machine thing. The universe has its laws and its functions, true, but it operates for a reason of its own, not for our small, mortal little delusions. How can we frail, fleshy things be so arrogant to believe we already know everything of why the universe works as well as it does? He pressed a finger down on the flesh of the artificial arm. Believe me, this is as much a miracle for you as it is to me. Both stared down at the arm, an oddly grisly sight now that they knew of its hidden properties. After a while, Kensuke spoke again. If nerve endings work, there's really no reason, even if this defies logic, that control nerves shouldn't work. Have you tried it? Mana nodded slightly. But it's not much. Ikari could probably help out more than I can. This situation demands a thorough examination. Mana felt her lips tilt up. Shinji-san. Hey! Kensuke pointed at the arm. It moved. Did you see that? Mana blinked and focused her gaze back to it. Sorry. No. What were you thinking of? Mana blushed. Kensuke squinted and bent over the open hand. He moved the joints back and forth. I see, he said, nodding wisely. So perversion powers it after all. Mana actually stamped her foot and quivered with ire. It does not! Yeah? Kensuke blew on the palm and grinned. Then imagine Ikari handling this arm. His hands stroking all over it. His fingers playing on your skin. To be held unresisting in his embrace. The arm shivered. Kensuke laughed. Shut up! Mana shouted. Her face was all red. Kensuke laughed harder. In the years following Second Impact, there was a brief resurgence of big gun shipbuilding. The violence of Adam's rebirth knocked the Earth off its axis, and incidentally also scrapped almost all the satellites already in orbit. Without the luxury of GPS and orbital mapping, all long-range strikes had to make do with more mundane methods. Not to mention that, given the blind chaos of those days, sophisticated missiles and other equipment had to be hoarded until the industrial base itself could get back onto its feet, much less so get around to making replacements. There was also the rampant paranoia in that any missile in flight might be a nuke, and it was thought best not to agitate the hornet's nest any more than it already was. Long-range bombardment was still necessary, however, and the resurgent UN had to land troops onto uncontested territory. In the end, it turned out that launching ships with big calibers and minimal electronics was faster and cheaper than churning out new missile frigates and carriers. Submarines were a reduced threat for a time, as the hunter-killers had a closer, more stringent duty, protecting the remaining strategic nuclear reserves. At all costs, World War III had to be avoided, especially since nuclear arms had already been used again. India and Pakistan had glassed each other into a ghastly silence. The Middle East was a self-devouring meat grinder. Yang was running around unstoppable through the eastern half of Asia. The UK remnant was ready to go bare knuckles with France to get somewhere to live. They had very little left to lose, while mainland Europe was left mostly untouched. With armoured columns and booming broadsides, the US was the first to consolidate its territories from petty warlords, even going so far as gaining an alliance with the nations to the north and south, forming the Greater Americas Treaty. Europe gave its support shortly after, with the Russian and Allied states lending their assets following next. At least that much, the military planners supposed, was necessary to even match Yang and keep him from blazing west like some sort of modern Khan. Fortunately, that proved hardly necessary. The chaos of the early years ended, but there were still hot spots to pacify. Eventually, though, there was once again a surplus of floating metal. The GPS network was slowly rebuilt, and construction began on the 4 nerve sites. Most of the ships were mothballed, pending future need. The spectre of World War III hadn't really faded away, even after 15 years. Even after Gaggiels cleaving through the Pacific Fleet, there were still more ships than the UN knew what to do with. Of course, it wasn't as if just anyone with the cash could simply pony up and get their hands on one. All things considered, though, they were cheap. Someone bought 2. Since time was roughly equivalent to money, throwing enough currency around quickly had one of the ships refitted and removed of its aft turrets for cargo space, like some sort of battle barge, one of the engineers had quipped. The other had its electrical systems ripped out and reworked to handle an on-board nuclear fusion reactor, which in itself cost twice as much as the ship. Hakone First Anchorage received word that, barring interruptions, a UN support task group was due to arrive in 4 days. No pomp or ceremony was needed nor wanted. The new UN observer wanted to keep everything low-key. If fate could laugh, it would have. Yeah, right, it would have said. It wasn't that Kaworu disliked the people he had to work with. His masters at SEAL knew he preferred to work alone, and for good reason. Though to make full use of the Earth's cradle, he had at least to get along with his fellow pilots. In truth, they didn't disappoint, confirming for him what he expected out of humanity. He wasn't humanity's judge. He recognised that justice had nothing to do with what he wanted to happen. Objectively, though, he had to admit he found them straining his bounds of stoicism. Martin Arthur Bettelheim was one of the rare children capable of activating an Ava. His score wasn't so impressive, barely more than what it takes to get it moving, but it was enough to separate him from the sea of common humanity. His problem was that there was no spare Evangelion for him to pilot. That left the teen eternally irritated, as if his very destiny was stolen from him. He had a right to stand in glory alongside Ikari, Ayanami, that American pilot whose name escaped him for the moment, and Suryu. He never failed to point this out whenever the chance came up. The last especially rankled, since he too was of German descent, and was hailed as a prodigy in his own circle. The teen stood tall and proud, on the gantries overlooking his heavy mechanics area. His face was fair, his blonde hair cropped into a flat top, and his uniform was white. If there was any other effect he needed to present a glowing countenance, he would have used it. Chance to shine, Nagisa, he said loftily, his teeth bared in a grin. The doctor will coax the secrets of the AT field from the aliens, and then we are going to show the world that the Evangelions are obsolete. He watched a bright red jewel-like orb of the Angel's core being brought in. We have the best technology, and we can show these fools, that pretentious bitch, that they're not all that special. And that, perhaps, was what irked Kaworu. The pilot kept speaking out against Asuka. Kaworu couldn't have cultivated her attention so far without developing some affection in return. Bettelheim tried so hard to be like Soryu that his successes only highlighted the gap between them. What in Asuka was brimming self-confidence, in him showed only to be deep-seated arrogance. Where Asuka sought to prove herself the best, he wanted to be known as simply better to anyone, everyone. Specifically Soryu, though. He'd love to destroy her in proving himself superior. Of Shinji he was dismissive, an overblown lackey, he'd said. He was the beneficiary of everyone else's hard work, just stepping up to grab the credit. Kaworu couldn't decide if he found this laughable or appalling. Though in essence, he supposed this was true. What Ikari had that he lacked was a collection of competent henchmen/women did fit, didn't it? And he was the secret agent here. Kaworu let out a small chuckle. Personal power didn't win an empire. Logistics and organisation did. Martin flinched at the sound. I have a question, Bettelheim-kun. The pilot nodded, with an imperious flick of a hand bidding him continue. Kaworu smiled slightly, for he could see this subtle insult was a form of protest. Martin Bettelheim felt threatened, for it was just so obvious Kaworu was compiling a report to some higher authority. It was hard to open up to someone who held a sword of Damocles over the team. Which is more important to possess, power or recognition? The hybrid asked. Martin thought about it for a few moments. Power's good, but what's the point if no one knows it? False modesty sickens me. Then he leaned back on the railing, folding his arms over his chest and staring past Kaworu's shoulder. But if you pretend to have power and don't have it, sooner or later someone will take it all from you. They're not mutually exclusive, are they? One can be the root to the other. Well, yes, but for discussion's sake, please choose only one. Then I'd rather have power, of course. Martin sniffed. What's this about? Feeling underappreciated even if you're the one who took down the angel? Kaworu smiled again. He had a cheerful charisma of his own that disarmed caution. No, not really. Is it more proper to say the equipment shot it down? He said, recalling Martin's earlier words about Shinji being the beneficiary of everyone else's hard work. The blonde-haired pilot nodded, satisfied. Don't sell yourself short. It doesn't take much skill to pull a trigger, though. I'd rather have a proper fight. Kaworu kept his upbeat expression, though the edges of his smile may have tightened. I have tracked snipers in the jungle rot and infested mud. The desert may be merciless to the unprepared, but the jungle devours the unwary, and only there and against such men have I ever feared for my life. I may loathe my own mortality. So it is that when mere humans go beyond their own physical limits, that even I must applaud. Perhaps you'll have your chance soon, he said instead. It would be interesting to see how a truly empowered jagged wolf compares to the Ava. He looked aside to the third pilot standing nearby. She kept her head down and her hands clasped in front. Her posture was so straight that it seemed like she was shrinking into the background. Sarah Campbell had straight black hair cropped to neck level, and eyes like pale shale. Her demeanour was so meek and unresisting that it was a wonder to many how she could even be counted on to accomplish, well, anything. She was more interesting to Kaworu than her partner. He was used to people looking at him oddly, even outright fearing him. People his own age had extreme difficulty in just talking with him. He had concerns and a mode of speech far above the teenage level. There were those who found his looks exotic and attractive. He would never really belong anywhere. How about you, Campbell-san? Are you looking forward to it? It was the first time in a long while that he felt utterly ignored. His presence there was of utterly no matter to her. In fact, her own presence seemed to be something even she could forget. Her silence responded to his earlier question. Only power mattered. Sarah Campbell did not hold crippling self-doubt, but rather a crushing certainty that human life, even her own life, was cheap and meaningless. Africa was the last place to stabilise after impact. It wasn't a good time to be a person of pinkish complexion. Even worse, her parents were merely tourists there, out on their honeymoon and there for the sharks. What they went through, what she'd seen with her own young eyes, she kept all to herself. What even Kaworu mistook for a sad case of young, blind romantic attachment to Martin turned out to be something more parasitic. He wondered how anyone could take that sort of abuse, then recognised that the boy in question was incapable of expressing his own feelings in a conventional way. The mountains of Ndoto and its Earth's Cradle were not like Hakone and its Tokyo 3, where youthful antics were, if not diverting, at least tolerated. Though Martin was verbally abusive, it seemed he had yet to entertain his curiosities upon her body. Perhaps because she was not his equal, because she didn't value her own flesh, her own existence. Neither can he. Passivity was seen as desirable in a woman, wimpy in a man. Overflowing will was a trait hailed in men, shrewish in a woman. And yet, seeing it like this, it seems to have missed the redeeming values of the whole endeavour. What would it be like to know a Shinji Ikari so shy and passive,
instead of his unflagging purpose? What about an Asuka Langley Soryu, who let nothing stand in the way of her pride, instead of searching for the greater good in every setback? He so wondered. He sighed, feeling his solitary duty. They might be my adversaries, but seeing these, I can honestly say that I don't regret helping them in my own way to become better people. It was not so strange, he recalled, that sometimes one's own enemies can be his only real friends. What could he have been like without something to define himself against, with only the menial and unpleasant tasks doled out by Seal to occupy his time? Probably some sort of broody, overly sentimental, suicidal freak, he supposed. Too much time around these people, I'd have started to pity them, and with no choice but to live with them until I could annihilate myself in Adam's cleansing rebirth, I would have started to pity myself too. One of the MPs approached the pilot and addressed him. He saw Martin flare his nostrils in muted resentment, but Kaworu was recognised as holding actual authority, even if the other team remained team leader. The soldier saluted. "The pilots are hereby ordered to return to the laboratory," he said. Martin sniffed and went ahead, with Sarah following at a dutiful distance. Kaworu trailed behind, committing the way to memory. The lab occupied the entire 23rd to 25th levels of the Earth's cradle, level with the floor of the main hangar, and right above the main blast doors leading into the cryo chambers. The whole complex had walls lined with wires and piping, all utterly new, and in the rush of construction left covering wall plates as a waste of metal. It felt like the innards of some alien broodmother. The smell of rusting iron and machine oil intensified as they entered the main lab. Its gregarious use of space seemed cramped, with all the machinery necessarily jammed close together to assembly line the work. Irael's core was huge and had to be left outside on the hangar. The production model tridents loomed over it, and thick cables linked all three to the complicated apparatus around the core. Technicians and scientists were running around, even those unsure of what to do made as if they were busy at something important. The chief scientific officer kept his tirade on their apparent uselessness and incompetence, and how he'd love to do all that needed to be done, to make sure it's all done correctly, but he only had one pair of hands. Therefore, he had to rely on idiots, barely evolved out of monkeys, and if they messed up this important experiment, he would have them shot. Dr. Sean Vordlader was a tall man, but seemed shorter due to his rounded proportions and gleaming bald head. He was clean-shaved, with a face that should have seemed jolly, but instead was twisted in unrestrained rage. That impatience receded a little when he saw the pilots arrive. Good. Get over here," he said, while motioning to several capsules similar to nerve synchro test plugs. On a closer look, Kaworu realised these were nerve plugs. More Nerve Germany swag. Martin stared doubtfully down at the synchro clips he was given. "Didn't you say these things are inefficient? We don't really need the feedback, only for the machinery to move as fast as we want it to." "Just because you can repeat my words doesn't mean you can even approach my line of reasoning," the scientist shot back. "Are you even capable of doing as you're told, or do I have to send you back to school?" Martin growled, stuck the clips on his hair, and went over to the testing plugs. The school was a notion embraced by many militaries as a direct response to the utter mess of the post-impact wars, where flexible and unconventional tactics were needed to prevail over constantly changing strategic aims. Children were trained from a very young age. No hard task to find experimental subjects. There was a surplus of orphans everywhere. Methods varied, from stern discipline to the outright draconian. Their suffering was supposed to make them superior. That was beaten into their heads at every turn. Someone like Soryu, who at least had a mother, to be so celebrated for her comparatively easy work. It was irksome. Mana Kirishima's school was more on forging generals and evolving doctrine. Martin and Sarah came from one of the more mercenary schools, the one with actual death ratios. Kaworu followed into the plugs. He never actually had any need for such schooling, though his early life was filled with many painful tests. Many soldiers found him creepy enough that they simply assumed he was the fruit of one of those illegal schools. General Jonathan R. Stockman barreled into the area just as the final connections were being set. "What are we doing here, Doctor?" he asked archly. "What I am doing is to scan the Angel's core by using a sympathetic location graph." He motioned aside to a big monitor. "Evangelions are made out of angel material. AT field theory goes that it is both event and location. Therefore, it is possible to check the field generation by introducing distortion effects, much like using sonar. You're going to try and generate an AT field? I thought no. One does not need an entire Evangelion to generate a field. Even Akagi mentions that the core most likely contains field generation apparatus of an angel. He was not able to gank the Evangelion spare parts which could have improved his research, to his continuing frustration. They are composed of exotic material, after all. AT field refers to absolute territory. Whoever coined the appellation absolute terror needs to be shot. That doesn't even make sense. The general blinked. He was a career soldier, and while feeling out of depth, was hardly stupid or dense. You're going to hook these children up to an angel? I cannot allow this, he spluttered out. Are you mad? Everyone around him looked distinctly uncomfortable. The pun was just too easy. Dr. Lader stuck his bulbous jaw out. A portion of an angel. We supply the power. The pilots here have enough activation talent, but with 3 of them the signal is dilute. I assure you, it is perfectly safe. He motioned aside again. One of the technicians pulled down a switch, sparks flew, and a current flowed through Irarel's core. A humming sound filled the air. See? Simple, the scientist continued, feeling his bones vibrating along. He gestured again and someone threw a second switch. The sound intensified, pitched higher. General Stockman lifted his bushy eyebrows. Did you just assign a musical scale to the thing? Dr. Lader coughed. It seemed a good way to mark frequencies at the time, he said with some flippant edge. Frankly, I'm surprised Nerv makes so much of the difficulties with generating an AT field. It's ridiculously easy. The Evangelions may be based on angel physiology, but it's clear the biomachinery used are degraded compared to pure samples. If we have to use the enemy's own tools to destroy them, why should we hesitate? 'Cause it's the enemy, alone, the general grumbled back. What makes you think those things would make it that easy for us? We shouldn't take unnecessary risks, not with these children. Be reasonable, Doctor. Oh, please. All progress depends upon the unreasonable man. Seeing the man in charge of protecting the Earth's cradle was inclined to be likewise as unreasonable in his own definition of duty, turned to Kaworu and asked, Mr. Nagisa, I am given to understand that you have some knowledge about these things. What do you think?
The theory's sound, sir, the hybrid replied, looking towards the general. Even if the angel manages to retain its consciousness while reduced to, in human terms, just one single organ, there's no actual feedback from this. It's not a neural control system. We're the ones dumping our own thoughts into the field. That should make it even harder for the angel to do anything with its own field. Dr. Lader nodded approvingly. Good. Nagisa, remind me later to ask you where you learned AT field theory. Yes, sir. I do have one question, though. The scientist, just about to say something sardonic to the general, turned around. What is it now, Nagisa? Which do you think is better to have? Power or recognition? Both Dr. Lader and General Stockman frowned. The latter reacted first. Why'd you ask? Humour me, please. His thin smile was not precisely threatening, but made it seem as if not answering would be an admission of personal weakness or stupidity. The scientist shushed him. Does this have something to do with the wave/particle duality of angel exotic matter? His eyes were distant, mulling over puzzles on physical paradox. Absolute territory. I'm getting something here. No, I'd have to say power after all. Energy can be converted later on. It's not that complicated, General Stockman said, overbearing. Though I'd have to agree. Some people serve best in the sun, but only in the shadows to change a stick. He was made of those men who did the most and expected no great reward. Without them, no strategy could ever have won peace for the world. We do not have that luxury of choosing our obligations. He turned and looked up at the shining red orb. I'd be perfectly happy to have these things just stop attacking. Hey, power to hum. That's what stops things right at the bargaining table. As the duly appointed protector by the UN, he had a knee-jerk reaction to being called a warlord, since he'd already spent so much time and so many men fighting them. There's still so much we can learn. It would be a shame to destroy them all, added Dr. Lader.
His grin was twisted. The Evangelions are machines made with some facets of angel biology. But if we could harness these monsters... You have no basic hatred for the angels, as such? Kaworu asked. The implications of later enslaving the angel was again not unexpected. Never took. Ha! Dr. Leda spat. How indicative of brutish, uninspired intellect. No, I have no problem with the angels as such, except that they seem inclined to continue what started with Second Impact. I'm not inclined, however, to grant that they have significant intelligence. Pure biology, they lack the necessary perspective to progress beyond their means. Natural selection is but the bastard offshoot of random chance. We know our own weakness, so we will have their strengths. Power goes to those with the will to seek it out and claim it. The general just sighed and rubbed his forehead. Just trying to live the best we can, that's all. Yes, and as such we must use whatever we can get, especially with those more favoured, snatching at everything that may be useful. Dr. Leda sneered, showing his uneven upper teeth. Are you satisfied, Nagisa? He wondered of the odd events that led up to the Earth's cradle developing into a twisted mockery of Nerve and Tokyo 3. The cradle itself, a man-made geofront that paled in scale to Lilith's shell. The pilots and the production tridents, each themselves strange and unbalanced reflections of their counterparts. Their scientists, their soldiers, all consumed in their tasks and trying all the harder to deny their natural disadvantages in location, assets and personnel. Delusion was a powerful driving force indeed. Is there really such a thing as a collective consciousness? He asked himself. Minds all linked through intuitive threads, grasping at the unfolding patterns of history. With his preference for his angel half, he couldn't really discern that. Or, more likely, just a process of parallel evolution. This holds the remnants of Nerve Berlin, and is a direct competitor to Nerve Tokyo. Less imitators than echoing what works. As whales and fish share the same shape, even if one breathes air and the other filters seawater. This appealed to him. It was like Adam's own function. What brutal irony of the universe was this, that those who held on to the means and ideals that man deserves to live were those who feared they might not prevail on sheer virtue alone, while those who shouted in maniacal fervour, the Xeno must die, see their task only as an inconsequential side effect of fighting for the lives of those they love. Mankind was not a rational being, once more Kaworu decided firmly. Everything they did held the glimmer of the ridiculous. Kaworu bowed submissively. Thank you for your time and insight, sirs. Well, we've wasted enough of it already. The scientist turned again to General Stockman. So we can proceed? Actually try to do something productive? Fine, do as you want. The pudgy man lifted his arms. All circuits set. Ready exchangers. Begin experiment! There were cracks and hisses, sparks and the crackling hiss of high voltage lines. Above all this rose a tone, hitting their hearts and hardening the air. Uriel's core began to show obvious signs of vibration, its crystal surface starting to ripple. The Trident Warborn pilots had their eyes shut, and all concentrating didn't seem to be suffering any discomfort. Fascinating, Dr. Leda shouted. Are we getting anything? There is a field, sir, one of the assistants replied, having to raise his voice too over the din. Hits? Well, the core shell's just glass. Nothing more than simple silicon. And like glass, it's actually a viscous liquid. I have eyes, I can see that. What about the inside? The screen showed a grainy, undulating haze. The resemblance to an ultrasound for looking at a wound was keen and quite possibly intentional. Well, something's moving inside! The core's shimmering red surface transformed from a globe into a mess of sharp spikes. The spines shot out and bored into the walls, flowing out and hardening into thread-like links. The tone turned into a scream. Then Uriel's core split open, and red wriggling things poured out of the cavity. Dr. Sean barely had any time to turn around before the things just dropped over him, covering his corpulent body. Where the red pikes plugged into the walls and machinery, the metal bulged out, vein-like. The tone continued, screeching. Like an orange flood, the innards of Irrael poured out and pulled under any people caught in the flow. The pilots couldn't get out of their pods in time. Even Kaworu didn't react, as what looked like a mottled orange slug crawled across his face. Shutting bulkheads did nothing, as the intrusion only spread through the walls, turning the pipes into literal arteries. The hangar began to fill up with reddish-orange liquid, and upon that floated a horrifying, writhing, larval mess. Someone had enough time to smash the big red button for general alarm. Unfortunately, with both the scientific and military commanders first buried by the strange assault, the keys to the base self-destruct were unavailable. Red tendrils sank fusion plants and began to gorge. Halfway across the world, AT field warning systems were going crazy. Masato rushed to the control room, rice still stuck to her cheek. "Another attack?" she asked as she slid into a command chair. "The timing's perfect as usual. Perfectly inconvenient." "No, ma'am. The worldwide warning system just got a hit with a widespread blue pattern," Shigeru reported. "There's so much of it the sensors got blinded for a while. We're just now resolving where it's coming from." "Son of a bitch!" Misato cursed, in English, as the main screen showed the result. She turned to see Ritsuko just arriving. "Look at that! I wish I could say this is really all that unexpected. But I can't." "Can ya?" the scientist responded flatly. "Someone bit off more than they could chew," Misato replied. She bit at her thumb and frowned. "Or is this somehow intentional? Can we get satellite imaging yet?" "Katsuragi, report." Misato sighed. She swiveled her chair around to see Gendo had arrived. She wiped at her face and looked up at the old men on the command tower. "We don't have any information yet on whether or not this is an angel attack. It does seem to be centered on the region containing the Earth's cradle, though." "That is unacceptable. You must clarify the situation promptly." "That's reality," she retorted. "You will know when the equipment gets the data. The Directorate Oversight has no authority to override combat operations. We know what to do, sir, and stopping it to explain it wastes valuable time. You know the same time the rest of us do. You know, like normal people." Gendo narrowed his gaze. "Katsuragi," he said warningly. She huffed and turned around. "Tell the UN we're taking our option on preemptive nuclear strikes," she said to Shigeru. "Where are the pilots?" she asked Maya next. "Already in the launch lift, senpai." Good. "The civilians?" "Class 5 emergency has been declared," Makoto reported. "They're heading to their specially assigned shelters now. Hakone 1st Prefectural Defense Force has been authorized to enter the city for defense and support." Masato nodded. Those drills were working then. The military were protecting shelters far enough as not to get in the Evangelions' way. At any point, though, they could rush in, empty, and relocate shelters in a hurry as the unexpected factors of combat revealed itself. There were trucks and APCs and rigorously practiced soldiers for that. "We're getting a satellite feed now," Shigeru reported, somewhat unnecessarily as the main screen flickered into the view. The Earth's cradle was buried in the mountains of the Indoto mountain chain and was hard enough to find from orbit. It was the AT field flaring from the region that pinpointed the location. The matte black disk of the cradle's elevator and main shield showed on screen. The surrounding mountainside began to crack and the disk bulged out. Slowly, the cradle began to reveal itself. The name Earth's Cradle was fitting. Unlike Nerve's own geofront, which was a perfect sphere, the cryogenic facility was buried under layers of rock and armor, the upper half of its cavity filled out. Only the bottom half was used for the facility. Seen from the side, the plans looked indeed similar to a baby's basket, with the main elevator shaft leading up to a second bulb as like a handle for rocking the cradle. Then there was the whole vessel for cryogenic suspension and genetic stocks. The Earth's cradle began to rise, breaking itself free from the rocks. It had changed, acquired a new shell, become one creature with all its parts contributing to the whole. It was a perfect sphere, floating dark and serene and impossible in the air. Ritsuko cursed. "Misato, remember what you said about the angels earlier? How they were changing the more we see them." "Getting smarter, you mean?" The blonde shook her head. "No, more dangerous. And just larger. The first angel we found was around the size of the Ava. The next was larger, then something the size of battleships. She grimaced. After Asuka arrived, the size was again similar to the Ava, but there were two. Then that creature in lava, big as a hill.
Masato nodded grimly.
Yeah, I see. And a thing during Valentine's Day, taller than the city. That orbital attack angel, how big was that? 4 kilometers end to end.
The operations director frowned.
Yeah, I was starting to wonder about the angel we've been fighting. It didn't really seem that big or that dangerous.
She slapped her chair's armrests.
Then it pulls this shit. Senpai, is it even the same angel?
Mai asked.
If it isn't, we're in deep trouble,
Masato replied.
How big is this thing?
Ritsuko tapped at her own console.
Extrapolating, I'd say about 6 kilometers in diameter. That's about as much as we're using of the geofront.
Masato twitched.
Our geofront's still bigger though? Really, Masato, is it a good time to feel competitive about this? Yes. Now that's what we have on the surface. Almost 1 kilometer in.
Ritsuko pointed up at this.
Our geofront is actually a perfect sphere going down 13.5 kilometers. I'd hate to see what it takes to get this airborne.
Masato blinked.
I'm surprised you're not making a litany of how this is pissing even more on physicists' graves. I'm sorry, Katsuragi. I'm frightened beyond all capacity for rational thought,
she replied dully. Everyone stared up at the screen as the infested Earth's cradle began to drift east. It had a shell well capable of withstanding direct nuclear blasts. It held a complete and sophisticated production facility inside, along with some of the finest creative minds of the human race. And it could not be overemphasized. Effing huge. It hadn't done anything yet, but already blind terror and self-destructive panic began to bloom in the hearts of those watching its inexorable approach. Masato's words summed up the thoughts of everyone there.
Oh, this is so going to hurt,
she whispered.